you imagine getting sacked from your job with this sound playing out in the background? If you didn't recognise that, that is a balloon probably being tied into a dog shape by a clown. This is what happened very recently. A New Zealand man got an email from his boss inviting him to a meeting to discuss his future role. He suspected the worst. Luckily, he was told he could invite someone else to the meeting for emotional support. So that's exactly what he did. He invited an emotional support clown. And the story goes that during the meeting, the clown blew up balloons and folded them into a series of animals and made this rather distracting noise as the bosses were trying to get down to work and actually formally sack this employee. But it does bring up a couple of questions about what you can do in terms of legally bringing an emotional person or a support clown to a formal work event or, indeed, sadly, to your sacking. Brad Petley is an employment lawyer with Acumen Lawyers. Brad, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Terry.
How many times have you been called into a dispute where a clown's been in the room when someone's being sacked?
This story is a cracker. This is the first time I've ever heard of a support clown being brought into a meeting, but given that people have come in all shapes and sizes and proclivities, it sort of doesn't surprise me in the end.
Well, it is under the term of an emotional support person, so let's dig a little bit more into that. Do they have to be a person? Can they be a dog, a cat, or a budgie?
Short answer, no.
Right.
No. There is a legal aspect to this, because the unfair dismissal laws, where an employee files an unfair dismissal claim, one of the things the Fair Work Commission has to consider is whether there was an unreasonable refusal by the employer to allow a support person to be present at such a meeting. And if there was a refusal and it wasn't reasonable, well, that can turn the whole process unfair and cause an unfair dismissal verdict.
All right, so let's get away from the dogs, the cats, the budgie, and even the clown, and look at the reason why a support person is allowed in a meeting like this. What's their role?
Yeah, their role, it's an important role. It's basically to provide emotional support and assistance during the meeting. They must act in a courteous and reasonable manner, and not be disruptive to the process. They're not allowed to be the employee's representative. They're not there to conduct an amateur Perry Mason in the process, but they're also not limited to hand holding and passing tissues. Like if they see some sort of unfairness, like just say the interviewer was asking a number of staccato-like questions at once and the person was looking confused, they are able to say, "Excuse me, look, my friend's confused. You might need to rephrase that question."
Okay, so they can have a speaking role.
They can. It's got to be conducted carefully, and from experience, a lot of employers are nervous about that. A lot of employers don't. They think the support person just has to sit there mute, but the last thing they want to do is to get into some sort of argument with the support persons and derail the process.
And then again, it can end up in an unfair dismissal claim.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can.
Okay, so the person is allowed to interject if they feel that the person who is the subject of the meeting is being treated unfairly. What else can that support person do?
Well, just say that the person overcame with upset. They were starting to cry, but the employer's representatives just continued questioning. The support person could pipe up and say, "Oh, look, my friend is clearly upset. I think we should have a break." But you'd hope that the employer, like the HR people, would have enough presence of mind to know when someone's upset and say, "Look, let's take a break." But perhaps if they were new to the process, they may not have that training. But I do have some comments about if someone does bring a clown to a meeting.
Oh, I want to get into that shortly. No, let's get the serious stuff out of the way. I'm not that's not going to be serious. So who, in general, would a support person be? So, I mean, if you're being brought into one of these meetings, it's usually the writings on the wall, isn't it? That it's not going to be a favourable outcome for your career with that company. They're pretty serious meetings. Who do people usually bring in? Is it their best friend? Is it their partner? Is it a union representative allowed to be that person as well?
Yes, or all of the above. And look, there's no one size fits all for a support person, other than the fact of their role. Like it could be a co-worker, it could be a relative, it could be a spouse, it could be a justice of the peace, it could be a friend.
Can that emotional support person record the proceedings of that meeting?
They, as an employer, you'd need to, as part of the ground rules or the housekeeping rules at the start, you should make it clear that there's to be no audio recording of it. They can take notes if they wish, but their role is there to provide support and assistance, not be like a court reporter in the process.
So they can't be taking down, an audio or visual recording of anything that's said in that meeting.
No, I think it's a good procedure not to allow that to happen.
Why?
Well, their role is there for emotional support, but but as an employer, would you like that put on social media? Like it could be edited in an embarrassing way, or because we all know the horror stories of social media where salacious or misleading claims could be made or emotive things, and the next thing you have some sort of angry tribe, perhaps boycotting a company or even making angry phone calls to the switchboard.
So they could blow up a whole new legal issue for defamation and beyond.
Oh, certainly.
You're listening to Brad Petley. He's an employment lawyer, and we're delving into the role of an emotional support person, sparked off by a pretty strange story out of New Zealand. We'll hear more details at that again shortly. Can anyone request an emotional support meeting, a person to be in a meeting with their bosses at any time, or are there only certain circumstances that this is allowed?
Well, generally it's if the matter pertains to a disciplinary or performance matter, where the matter is serious and it may have consequences on that person's future employment. Just day-to-day meetings, day-to-day perhaps performance coaching or counselling, I say performance coaching, not something that's going to potentially end up with a disciplinary sanction or such as dismissal or formal warning. There's no reason that you can't approach an employee to speak to them. You should be able to speak to them just about the day-to-day operations of that section or that part of the employer.
Right, but can an employer refuse to have an emotional support person there because it's not a disciplinary meeting? It is about, who's leaving the dirty coffee cups in the green room?
Well, that's liable to relate to a conduct issue. So, but they can because the question is, does this person need emotional support? Now, it may be the case the person is known to have some sort of fragile makeup that and they've been employed without understanding, so it might be reasonable for someone to allow a support person to be there, but you really don't want this to get a life of its own when you're just trying to deal with a simple matter. Just, I don't know, say someone hasn't cleaned their keyboard on their computer and you just want to say, hey, Melanie, can you keep your keyboard clean and tidy? You don't want to have to be frustrated with a support person every time that chat occurs.
Absolutely, and the support person might be doing a clown gig at the time. So let's look back at this. This, of course, just resetting the scene, a New Zealand man who kind of knew the writing was on the wall for his job. He got called into a disciplinary meeting. He was allowed to bring an emotional support person. He chose to bring an emotional support clown. And I'm not kidding. This is the noise, the background of that meeting. Yes, the clown was actually making animals out of balloons the entire time the meeting was underway. Brad, let's have a look at some of this, as it pertains to a clown as an emotional support person. Could you bring a clown to a meeting if the clown sat silent and didn't act like a clown?
Yes. Yes, you could.
What if the clown turned the HR meeting into a circus and started performing magic tricks?
And that's where the housekeeping issues come into play, because there is a trap here for employers. Because if a person turns up in a clown suit and HR straight away assumes that there's going to be some disruption, there's a trap there that they could unreasonably refuse someone who's actually there in a support person role. Because if you think it through, if someone turns up in a fireman's uniform, they may be a spouse of someone who's being interviewed, and they've rushed from work. So has this clown been hired as a prank, or are they actually a friend who've rushed from a performance to be a support person, and their costumes are relevant to the person attending?
Could the employer order the clown not to blow up balloons or do magic tricks?
Well, yeah, so I think they, after establishing the reason for that person's presence there, but has the clown necessarily is the clown's costume unnecessarily distracting the process? Do they need to take their hat off? Has the clown left all props outside? Because balloons, handshake buzzers, water squirting lapel flowers.
I mean, you said that they're an emotional support person. They're allowed to hand tissues to someone who might become a bit upset. What if the clown pulled out a handkerchief that appeared to never end?
Yeah, that is the risk. I thought of that.
Crossing a line.
It is. Perhaps HR would need to interject and ask when that hanky's going to end as it's being pulled out from the waistcoat.
What if the boss or the HR personnel refuses the clown entry because they've got calrophobia, fear of clowns?
I shouldn't laugh. Well, I suppose that raises questions about the HR person's ability to perform the duties of their job if they are carrying certain phobias that they may not be able to discharge their role. But really, it's hard to make a straight face. But there is an important situation because, it begs the question: well, if the clown doesn't fit the profile or fit the position of support person, what does the employer do then? And rather than saying, sorry, you've had your one chance, the employer should say to the employee, no, that's inappropriate, with an explanation, and invite them to nominate someone else.
You've never dealt with this situation in your working life. Have you ever had anything even approaching the weirdness of this one?
No. I'm sure. Look, there are lots of weird, wonderful things that happen in employment law because there's no one-size-fits-all human. But not standing here can I think of anything like this. But having said that, the employer was a creative person, so it sort of doesn't surprise you.
Yeah, it fits. I love it. I can't believe that we're talking about employment, workplace laws and clowns this morning. But thanks for clowning around with me this morning, Brad.
My pleasure.
I was waiting for another line from him there. He dropped all the lines as he walked into the studio, believe you me. Brad Petley is an employment lawyer with Acumen Lawyers, so one of the more unusual cases to discuss this morning here on your ABC Local Radio Brisbane.